So my assignment is to first introduce myself very briefly and then talk a little bit about prior learning assessment, define some terms before I pass the gavel to Becky and to Roxanne, who will flesh out some other examples of how this plays out. So if you don't know me, I'm the president of Charter Oak State College, and Charter Oak State College is a degree aggregator like Excelsior, like Edison. We were built 40 years ago, and I'll have some more things to say about Charter Oak. My particular past started really in distance learning. I founded and generated the Connecticut Distance Learning Consortium, which still exists, now reports to me as president of the college. So I've been kind of fortunate in my career to be part of two disruptive moments in higher ed. I got to play a role in distance education when that was messing up the academy. And because Charter Oak is competency-based, here I am again, having some of the same fun. That's very unusual in a higher ed career that you get to be part of two disruptive moments, never mind one. All right, so I talked a little bit about what degree aggregators and assessors are, but 40 years ago, when the community colleges were being created, and mostly it was women returning to college after they'd left to get married and have children, the industry was trying to figure out some way to welcome those women back into higher education without telling them to start over in freshman comp. And the solutions that got invented were something called degree aggregation. And the way that worked was, and the philosophy was, that we're going to assist adult students in completing degrees. The model was built on women who had some credit, but no credential. They were coming back, they were 30, they'd run the PTA, they'd run their churches, they'd educated their small children, they might have helped their husband launch a business or get these were very smart people. And they didn't belong back in freshman comp. There had to be some way to validate what they knew and what they'd done. Sound familiar? We didn't use competency, but that was really what we were looking for. So what we assumed was that learning occurs in lots of venues besides classrooms. And these returning adult students had had learning occur for them. And second, they often had deep pockets of expertise. They were ready to teach the classes that they were required to take, not take them. So the tools that these institutions created are the following. Okay, let me give you the institutions first. I talked about Excelsior and Edison and Charter Oak, but there was also Granite State, Empire State, and probably some others towards the west. These were institutions that were going to focus on adults. They were going to welcome them back. They were going to build tool sets so those adults could finish their degrees with efficiency. But there were some organizations that sprang up at the same time to help with the tools that I'm going to give a brief description of. They included ACE, the American Council on Education, CALE, the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, and NCCRS, which is the National College Credit Recommendation Service, used to be called PONSI. So these were organizations that weren't colleges, but were set up to help with things like portfolios and test preparations and alternate approaches to credit. So what the degree aggregators did when they got created was begin to look at transfer credit and develop policies that were very, very generous about transfer credit. So when Charter Oak was set up 40 years ago, you could get a 120 credit bachelor's degree from Charter Oak, all through transfer credit. Charter Oak offered no instruction, had no residency requirement, zero, and would accept college credits from any regionally accredited college anywhere. And in addition, didn't outdate credits after 10 years. I mean, it might outdate your computer science course if you studied COBOL. I mean, it's not going to translate today. But other than some exceptions like that, it was possible at Excelsior or Edison or Granite or Charter Oak to get a 120 credit bachelor's degree entirely through transfer credit. Second, you could get that same 120 credit bachelor's degree entirely through testing. You could use Dante's and CLEP and military tests and Excelsior built tests. And there were other tests out in the marketplace. And these colleges, like Charter Oak, would validate those tests, would assign them a certain amount of credit value, and would assess that credit value against the degree requirements that the college had set up. So you could do a 120 credit college degree solely through testing. We've had several, usually about one a year, a student who's done that. Typically only takes about a year for a 4-year college degree. These are very strange people. That was the joke. All right. Next, and I believe it was Edison that created the roadmap for this, and then CALE and ACE got involved, especially CALE. Portfolios got thought through. So if somebody had a deep pocket of expertise that they gained in industry or some other place that we thought might map to college credit, how do you do that? So what the portfolio systems tended to do was lay out a template for how you evidenced your expertise, and that template would be laid out against the course requirements for one or more college courses. So if you ran a daycare center for a number of years, there ought to be a way to map that experience against a course in entrepreneurship or a business creation class or an early childhood experience, because all of those skill sets were part of what it would take to set up and operate an early childhood center. So the portfolio method of attaining credit became a big piece of the degree aggregation colleges, and still is. And then finally, and this is the oddest thing, but the part that's the neatest, and ACE has done the most of this work. These colleges went out and took a look at credentials that existed in the marketplace, sent out teams of faculty to look at that credential and see if it had collegiate value. So could you look at a real estate appraiser's license, or could you look at the GMAT advanced test in English and come back and say, you know, if you can get this score on that, or you can pass that appraisal test, it's really the equivalent of this collegiate course at this level for this number of credits. And so in Charter Oak's case, we took a look at our own state police training, which takes 6 months. It's very intense. And that training will earn you over 30 undergraduate credits on a Charter Oak transcript. So we have 10 police chiefs with our degree, and I still get tickets. Now you get it. So we did transfer credit, we did testing, we did portfolios against course descriptions, because there's some other ways to do portfolios, but that tended to be what we did. And we did credit assessments, and again, ACE is the leader in that. ACE does tons of them. And these aggregator colleges accept the ACE recommendation, that's the word, for credit in many cases. So those were the pieces that we put together. A couple of quick words about Charter Oak, which was founded in '73. Now has a 6-credit residency requirement because Charter Oak now teaches lots of online classes. But the evolution of that, which happened on my watch over the last 16 years, was kind of interesting. The previous president saw students arriving at Charter Oak transferring in online courses. Connecticut really offered none. Charter Oak offered none. And she thought that this might be popular among adult students. So she got a consortium together in Connecticut to see if we couldn't develop online courses together. That was my job. And meanwhile, Charter Oak would develop a few until everybody else got running. Well, nobody else got running, particularly. Charter Oak just kept developing. Students just kept choosing courses instead of portfolios and tests. And when I took over the presidency, 85% of the college revenue was coming from online courses. I tell you this story because Charter Oak is still an aggregator. You can still transfer in 114 credits. We still have students who do the bulk of their work through testing, although not many. But it's an institution now that's really hybrid by its very nature. So it's got all of these online courses. A student can do their entire degree in several of our areas of major concentration using our courses. It does lots of credit transfer. Typically more than 70 credits come in and transfer. But it's doing both the aggregation and the instruction piece. I tell you this story because Charter Oak is one of the institutions that's on the steering committee of CBEN, the competency-based organization. You heard from several of its people today. And second, we've put in an application for the experimental sites and financial aid program out of the department. And our proposal won't surprise you. Right now, when a student comes to Charter Oak, they can use federal financial aid to take a course. What they can't do is use federal financial aid to do a portfolio, which is half the cost of a course, or a test, which is a quarter the cost of a course. And they can't because there's a rule in Title IV regulations that say all Charter Oak is allowed to deliver for Pell money are courses. So the experimental site experiment we want to do, and we're already doing it now with Gates money, is we want to offer students the opportunity to do portfolios and tests with their aid. We think students will do more of that. Right now they graduate with 13 credits that way. We hope to get to 20. Do more of it if their money applies. And Kale's study showed us that they'll retain at higher rates and graduate at higher rates if they have prior learning assessment credit, portfolios and tests, on their transcripts. So we got some positive responses to that proposal. We think that makes a lot of sense. We're pretty sure it'll lower costs for the students to do it. And if they do retain and graduate at higher rates, it should at least accelerate degree completion. So two of the problems that higher ed is struggling with is how do you control costs and how do you increase graduation rates? And this college is a big believer that prior learning assessment is a powerful way to do that. And now I turn things over to Becky.
Well, actually, I'm going to turn these over to Roxanne. I think
All
you're
right.
going to go next. Or I can go.
It doesn't, well, actually, Ed, first of all, I'm Roxanne Gonzalez. I was the president at Granite State College. My background is in adult education and training. I've been in the field for a long time, longer than I want to admit, and I'm a product of the system. I finished my degree overseas with the University of Maryland, University College, and went to these things called 8-week programs and took these things called CLEPs and wondered if they were legitimate. Could I get into grad school with these things? And so I was a non-believer, but then became a real firm believer, and it's been my career. And what I'm going to do is sort of pick up where Ed left off and give you 3 very different types of institutions and talk about the models at those institutions. Ed did a great introduction, so I don't have to repeat what he said, but I'm going to talk about a little bit about Granite State. I'm going to talk about Regis University, where I was prior to this, which is a Jesuit Catholic institution. And at Regis University, they had 3 colleges: the traditional college, Regis College, had 1,400 students; Rickard Hartman, which had 3,200 students in healthcare; and then they had this little beast called the College for Professional Studies, which had about 9,000 students when I left, predominantly online, 4 schools, and 52% of the revenue for the institution. Prior to that, I was at Park University, where we had about 26,000 students. The traditional college had about 1,200 students, and the College for Distance Learning had the remainder of those in some grad programs. We brought in 85% of the revenue for the entire university. So how did we do that? I want to talk a little bit about this philosophy. I'm teaching a grad course right now in adult learning and development, and it's a good reminder, one of the theoretical foundations, but it's also a reminder for me of the praxis between theory and practice. We say we want to bring these students on. How do we serve them? And what about those 18-year-olds that might have occupations out there that might actually be able to be assessed in some way? I've got a grandbaby coming here in about 3 or 4 weeks, and I keep watching these commercials for these leapfrogs, where these kids have their own tablets now, and I'm sitting there thinking, as I was thinking about preparing for today, I thought, at what point are these toddlers going to be able to take a challenge exam and get college credit? It's self-directed learning. That's what we assume with adult learners. It's what we assume with some of our students today. And so what I want to do is just build on some of the definitions that Ed brought about and just talk about these institutions individually. I was going to go over the institutions. I call them sister institutions. The only other one I would add is the University of Phoenix. It was started around the same time. UMUC's been around for about 75 years. They kind of got really everybody started. But for me, I think as I looked at the mission statements of these institutions when they all started, it's really about being innovative with programming to serve adult students. That was the crux of what they were trying to do. They were trying to solve problems of getting these individuals some kind of degree. The demographics for Charter Oak are similar to Granite State, similar to Park, and similar to Regis, at least in the colleges I worked in. Average age of 34 at the undergrad level. Predominance of females, 71% roughly. First generation students. That's who these students are. They're going for associates and bachelors. And I kind of put graduate programming a little bit on this side because I think graduate programming we assume are going to be adults typically. But given what I've told you about those 3 different institutions, there are a lot of variations. They all take the CLEP testing that Ed referred to. They all do the prior learning assessment, but they all do it a little differently. Regis, which is a private liberal arts Catholic institution, will take up to 90 credits in transfer. Granite State takes up to 90 credits in transfer. Park University, with 65% of its population being military members, only takes 75. So I always found that a little interesting that given the volume that they do with the military, they only take 75 credits in transfer to their 120 credits. Everybody does portfolio in a different way. Granite State has been, years and years ago when we were the College for Lifelong Learning, I managed our portfolio model. Regis University was doing a very similar model where the students would take a class, they would then write their portfolios, and boy, is that, I would never do it. It's a tough way to make a living for a student to get those credits. But they could assess up to the bulk of their credit that they could transfer in. So if you were a legislator in the state of New Hampshire, you could write, I had a woman who wrote 42 credits for her portfolio for her specialized bachelor's degree, very customized. Park University did not do portfolios, but they did something that Regis did not do and Granite State does do, which is to evaluate training programs. You talked about the police academies. Park University did it. Regis, we didn't do that. You had to write a portfolio to do that. Regis has now outsourced their in-house training for PLA over to Kale with their Learning Counts program. So there's a lot of variation that's happening across the country. I think for me, as I look at these different models, the similarities are that they're trying to utilize current technologies to and outsource where they can, but to utilize current technologies and to use vendors, the CLEP, the DSSTs, Kale, ACE. There's a lot of ability using the military credit, and I will tell you a little bit of bias here. You heard I did a lot with military education and training. I think if I was to make any recommendation to any institution in this room who's not currently doing it, the best thing you can do to bring on your veterans and your active duty military members is to give college credit for that military training. One of the bigger frustrations working the military side of the house is to have a military member come back and say, they won't take my training because it doesn't fit into their degree program. I'll get 4 credits for PE, and yet it may be somebody who's been on the flight line doing avionics and have a college transcript from ACE that demonstrates 45, 50, 60 credits, including things like calculus, but institutions won't take them. So I'll close by saying that I think for me, the big piece on these institutions is that they all have a similar mission, but they all approach it very differently, and they all achieve it differently. But the bottom line is, when you look at adult learning theory, the student comes to the table, and competency-based education, as we heard today, can mean everything from knowing how to do a widget to having the assessment to be able to write. We all assess it differently, but that adult learner, and I'm going to include 18-year-olds today based on the fact that these kids are doing Khan Academy, they're doing MOOCs, they're doing all these things. They come to us with skill sets and knowledge. We have a set of things that we want them to do. Our job, from my perspective as an adult educator, is to assess them where they're at, whether it be transfer credit, PLA, CLEP, and to help them fill that gap. Now, one of the things that I will tell you, I got an update of what's going on at Granite State. They are working with Kale. Kale's helping them put their competency-based education model together. And they're going to be doing a self-paced hybrid competency model, and that's what we were looking at Regis, something that's self-paced, highly competency-based in terms of filling the gap, transferability, kind of like a menu, if you will. So if the student comes in and they need, let's say, 40 credits, and they're going to be doing it credit-based and course-based, and we were doing the same thing at Regis, just because mentally I think it's easier for faculty and everybody to wrap their heads around it. Park is not going down this path. But to be able to say, I need 4 courses in equivalencies in management, can I do a self-paced mentorship with the faculty? Can I take a CLEP test? Can I take a course? To do that learning objects model where it's actually just a variety of ways in which you can do it so that there's not one set method for you to do it. I think the piece that's going to challenge us, as I look at the different models, are the faculty roles. There is a disaggregation in some of these models. Granite State is looking at a mentor and an assessor. When I left Regis, as we were looking at doing this model, we were looking at a faculty mentor, assessor, and we were adding a layer for an instructional designer, because we saw this model as having to have a completely different kind of structure. When we went online, we had a different set of how we developed and created our online courses. Blended did the same thing, or hybrid, however you use the term. When you do blended and hybrid, it's a whole different pedagogy. So we saw this at Regis as a whole new way of taking a look at how we're going to do learning from that piece. And we included instructional designers. So I think is in terms of what the emerging trends are, is I think it's up in the air. I think what we've heard today is that it's going to have to be customer focused, and I do use the word customer very seriously. It's probably because I've always had to bring in so much revenue where I've been. Self-directed, I think that brings in the last session this afternoon and in the one this morning. Truly, this is not a model that's going to be for everyone. Just as I learned when I ran prior learning assessment programs years ago, it's not an easy model. It's not going to be for those that are the faint of heart, but it's going to be for that student who's driven, who really needs that flexibility to be able to move at their own pace, whether it's quickly or slowly, but has the drive to do it. And with that, I will close. Becky?
Thank you. My name is Becky Klein Collins, and I'm with the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. And as Ed says, we've been involved with prior learning assessment and also competency-based education for the past 40 years. And we're celebrating our 40th anniversary next month in Chicago at our annual conference. We'd love to see you all there. Our KIL doesn't offer a competency-based program for students, but Nebby asked me to come here because we've been doing a lot of sort of observation and documentation of a lot of the newer models that have been emerging on the scene in the last few years. And they asked that I talk a little bit about what elements are in common across a lot of these programs and how they differ. And I think, you know, we're at the end of a day of focusing on a lot of the common elements of competency-based education, and I think we're all very familiar with it. And Roxanne, you summarized it very well, is that everyone's focused on the learning, not the seat time. These programs try very hard to meet students where they are and allow them to build on what they already know, and those are very important pieces. Also assessment, having an assessment component so that you're not just assuming, you're not just, you know, take our word for it, that these students have learned, but we're asking students to actually demonstrate what they know and can do, and that's and also a piece of it. But there are huge differences in how these programs have been designed, and I think you've heard a little bits and pieces from different programs throughout the day and also here today on this panel. The similarities, I think, from that Roxanne and Ed have talked about have been programs that have really adhered, for the most part, to a credit-based and course-based system, where you're using prior learning assessment to meet the students where they are, and prior learning assessment that maps what a student knows and can do to an existing course. So it's kind of a course match or course equivalency approach. So the programs really are designed around a set of courses or a certain number of credit hours that a student needs to learn, and how they acquire those credit hours and progress through the program is still very much, you know, tied to the credit hour system. The variety that you're going to see when you look at other kinds of competency-based models out there is that you're going to see huge variations in how in the relationship between a course structure or a credit-based structure. And you'll see lots of different programs that have taken huge steps away from a credit-based, course-based model, and more towards really allowing students to progress towards a degree by achieving or demonstrating mastery of these competencies. So it's really a competency-based structure. And so a program, let me just use, for example, the Western Governors University or the Southern New Hampshire model, and to some extent programs like Westminster College. These are programs where you start out by defining what the degree is in terms of a competency framework. What are the competencies that we expect our students to know and be able to do upon graduation? What is it that how is it that we're defining our degree in terms of competencies? And then designing a process for the students to go to in order to meet those competencies and then demonstrate them through assessments. The way that WGU and Southern New Hampshire both work is that students come in and sometimes they'll take a pre-test to show what they might know and be able to do. And then there are learning activities or learning resources that their coach or mentor will help them access in order to learn what they haven't yet mastered and being able to pass the assessment that's tied to that competency. And in that way, the students enter the program, they tackle a certain number of competencies, and then they engage in learning activities that have been designed by the program to help that student master the competencies and pass the assessment. The assessments are often, as we talked about earlier today, authentic assessments. They're not multiple choice assessments. Sometimes they are for certain content-based competencies or sub-competencies that a student may need to know. But for the most part, these programs are really trying to offer authentic assessments, what are some actual assignments that a student may have in the real world, in the workplace, where they would have to demonstrate these competencies in a real world setting. And those are the kinds of assignments or that serve as assessments for these students. And so that's essentially how a student will make their way through a program like a Western Governors University or Southern New Hampshire. But this is only just scratching the surface of what's possible with competency-based education. There are so many other programs that we're seeing emerge and are already up and running in many cases that are approaching it in a very different way. There's Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, and Lipscomb uses behavioral assessments as their first step for the student in a competency-based program. The program has been designed not from the DQP, the way a lot of other programs have been. They have really, they've used a competency framework that's been designed by a more corporate vendor called Polaris. And they've identified the competencies in conjunction with some local employers that they've been working with that want to help develop their management level employees. And first they developed the competency framework, identified which of the many Polaris competencies would define this degree that would meet both the employer expectations but also internally their faculty expectations on the academic side. And then there are a certain number of competencies that really lend themselves well to a behavioral assessment. And what Lipscomb does is they take a day-long session with a group of 6 to 8 students, and they put them in a room where there are assessors behind a one-way mirror, watching them engage with each other in team-based activities and also in individual assignments that they get throughout the course of the day. And the students can demonstrate, I think 7 to 10 different competencies during that particular day, and can earn up to 30 credit hours in that day of demonstrating these competencies. But it's a behavioral approach. They're actually asked to demonstrate real-life competencies in front of a panel of assessors. So that's another approach. Now, that's not the entire degree. There are other parts of the degree that offer learning modules that the student then takes to complete the other competencies that are required for a degree. So that's another approach. And then finally, I've been working on a case study of a program in Texas that is a partnership between the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board and Texas A&M Commerce and South Texas College, which is a 2-year institution. And these programs have developed a competency-based program. It's a bachelor's degree program in, I think, professional leadership. I'm blanking on the name, but it is a program where 3/4 of the degree is an online program that's competency-based, individual learning modules for the students online, where they, take a pre-test, show what they know, and then use learning modules, adaptive learning technologies to learn the material, learn the competency, and then take a post-test to demonstrate it. So 3/4 of the degree is that piece. But then they reserved the last quarter of the degree to be a face-to-face traditional course-based approach to really focus on team-based skills, critical thinking kinds of skills, the kinds of skills that they really thought needed to be in a different kind of setting where they're asking different things of the students and wanting to see a different kind of interaction between the students and faculty and between the students themselves. So that's yet another way to do it. And we're seeing also just lots of interest throughout the field. Kale is working right now on this program called CBE Jumpstart, which you might have heard throughout the day. We're working with 20 institutions over we're a year into it. We've got 2 more years and we're working with 20 institutions on the sort of ground stages of developing a program and helping them think through what they need to do to get started and also providing some assistance as they take their steps toward developing a program. And there's so much variety in what institutions want to do. Some institutions want to do the fully online Western governors model. Other institutions are really looking towards a more blended approach. How can we offer a competency-based option for students that can be this online, fully online module, but also if they want to bring in portfolio-based credit, or if they want to take certain courses in a face-to-face setting, like, you know, if they want to take some advanced math class that they really don't want to take online independently, but they want to take in a classroom with someone actually helping them, that could be an option for them. So there are programs that are really trying to figure out how can we make these kinds of programs really flexible for the student, again, this student-centered idea, and allowing for students to have different options depending on what their individual needs and preferences are. And the variation is not just in terms of whether the program is credit-based or course-based. You're going to see lots of different variations in the use of technology, lots of variations, as Roxanne said, in terms of the use of faculty, and the involvement of the faculty. Many of the programs that we're learning about are really involving faculty intensely in the design and development of these programs. And to be honest, it's really highly recommended that you involve faculty from the very beginning, because they're so important to the whole piece of rolling this out and having everybody understand why it is we're doing competency-based education and what their new role is in this model. Some are more self-paced than others. Some programs are using more adaptive learning technologies. Others are blending that with more face-to-face options or curated open educational resources that are available online. There are also different pricing models. Some are still based on a term or based on the credit hour. So if you have a competency framework, a lot of these programs will still equate it to the credit hour, have some sort of translation mechanism so that they can fit within the financial aid system. And so some of these programs have pricing models that are still based on the credit hour too. But others are more subscription based. So a student could take an unlimited number of competencies. They could tackle an unlimited number of competencies within a 6-month period, for example, for a certain amount of money. Others have it in 7-week increments. So they have these subscription models. So it's very different how these programs are designed and how they're run. So there's just not one model for doing this. We've heard a lot about how these programs are really designed for the adult learner, and why that is in terms of, you know, the flexibility and offering it to them, also being able to meet them where they are. So since so many of them are bringing so much college level learning to the programs. It's critical also that we remember that competency-based education is probably not a silver bullet for the adult learner, and that no matter how good your program is, life gets in the way for a lot of adult learners. Just, it happens. These are people who are juggling family responsibilities, you know, aging parents and young children at the same time. They have financial issues, they have work responsibilities. There are going to be times when life gets in the way for these students. That's why a lot of these programs have such intensive coaching that's built into the program as a way to kind of be ready and sort of monitor the learning analytics, so you can see when a student is engaged or is maybe dropping off, so you can step in and provide some support. But also, you have to recognize that there are going to be times when a student maybe not be a right fit for that particular program, or may need to step out for a while. And so it's important that these programs are built with some ability for the student to exit and enter or transition to a different program. I know that a lot of the programs the program designers are really thinking about these things and thinking, you know, we want to make sure that we recognize that CBE might not be for everybody, and there may need to be instances where the student exits and needs to transition to a different type of program. And so we want to build those exit ramps for the student. And I think that's really important to do. Just one more point. We've talked a lot today about this being for adult students, but there's also a huge amount of interest on the, for traditional students as well, and we've heard a little bit about that today as well as, what are the good things about competency-based education that could really translate to serving the traditional student as well. And we heard from the president of the University of Maine at Presque Isle today, and their program serves, 75% of their program is serving a more traditional age student. So there's ways in which that this kind of approach is really good for adults, but there's no reason why that the lessons from these programs can't also translate to more traditional programs or programs that are serving the traditional student. And I think I'll stop and then see if we can open it up to questions.
There's three areas of potential conflict as your institution thinks this through. One is pedagogical. So exactly what kind of competency-based program are you interested in, what kind of balance of stuff, that's fine. Then there's a cultural problem. How are you going to get your traditional faculty involved in the program in a way that keeps that body from becoming a block? And third, what's the business model you're trying to create? I mean, you can imagine that if you did it Paul's way, Paul set up a brand new business, and they thought through the pedagogical and business model program they wanted to create for College America, but he didn't have to have a cultural argument. There was no cultural argument. He was going to hire the people to do the work that the pedagogical and business modeling suggested he needed. But if you're trying to do this at an existing institution, there is going to be a cultural discussion, I use a polite word, battle, fight, family quarrel, as you try to figure out how this integrates with things that are very much not this thing. So with that, what questions have you got for us?
Well, can I just add real quick? Before we started, I was talking with Ed, and I guess what I would throw into that piece about the cultural piece is don't assume if you have a faculty who is dedicated and devoted to adult learning models that this is going to be an easy transition for them either.
Correct.
They will have the same questions, the same conversations as the fully tenured, tracked faculty that you have at your institutions. That doesn't change, and I would also just suggest that you include in that conversation your adjunct faculty as well. If you have a large adult program, if you're like any of the institutions I've been at, adjuncts are the backbone of what you do, and they really need to be involved at the very beginning as well.
Go ahead, Pam.
Okay.
I just actually all of the experience subsidy.
Right.
So there's been a lot of topic or
Right.
to get this.
That's a really, really good question.
I'm trying to figure out what
Right. And I don't.
a legacy, you're trying to a legacy program not as a separate unit. Off the ground. And what would be
Well, if you're a public higher ed, you can't borrow money. So you have only really two ways to do this, on whatever kind of institutional reserves you have, or whoever will give you free money. And the granting agencies aren't doing that anymore. States are broke. So it's very, very hard to find the capitalization you would require to do this. In Charter Oak's case, because we have a fairly functioning business model, because we're a distance learning offering institution with no on-ground courseware at all, we make money on the online courses we offer. The profit margin is very high. You don't hear that publicly very often, but it's true. I mean, in Southern New Hampshire would tell you the same thing, that their online course offerings are profitable in ways that their traditional college is less so. I'm trying to pick my words carefully. And College America isn't yet. So if you're going to capitalize something new that you want to do, You have two choices. Pam pointed to the first one. You can find the money to sustain this new enterprise until it reaches the black. Or you can do the thing that I think those of us that don't have those resources are going to have to do, and find the right partners. You heard that there's a bunch of people partnering with CALE around prior learning assessment because CALE has 40 years of history in how to do this. And rather than you try to put together a program of your own, hire people, train faculty, invent policies, get those policies passed by faculty who think you're replacing their courses with prior learning assessment portfolios, it's easier to partner with CALE. Charter Oak has already signed contracts with several colleges to provide that service as well. So I think partnership could be a substitute for capital investment for those institutions that can't either build a business model that a banker will buy or has a banker at all. I interrupted you, Roxanne.
That's okay. What I was going to say is, I think the approach at the last two institutions I've been at is we've also taken a look at where our skill sets are. What do you do really, I mean, the question is, what do you do really well? And does this make sense? So if you're at an institution that really buys into this notion of adults coming to the table, or students, let's just say generic students, it doesn't have to be an adult, comes to the table with learning that can be assessed or transferred. Utilize that as your skill set and build. One of the things that Granite State is doing is it's building on its heavy strength of prior learning assessment. It's not starting from scratch. It's taking their portfolio, their assessment of training, and they're building from there. So it's not from scratch. Now, we had put some money aside from money that was left over from the previous year, and it's not a lot. It's a state institution. But you build what you can with the revenues that you can actually reinvest. But I think the piece that struck me both at Regis and at Granite State is we really took the time to step back and say, should we do this? Why should we do it? Does it fit into the mission of the college that we're serving? And what do we bring to the table? And if you have a strong model already in place, it's a lot easier to go forward. You don't have to invest as much. Regis is very heavily online as well, so there's that nice mix that Ed brought into the picture, but I think you really have to build in with what you currently have. If you're starting from scratch, I think you're going to have some challenges and be creative about how you go about it. It is not a model that's cheap. It's a model that takes a lot of human resource investment. The only bargaining environment I was at Park was at Park. And what I will tell you at Park, we had a very robust prior learning assessment model for training, but no portfolio. And that may be one reason why they haven't gone down this path.
I don't think so.
Isn't University of Wisconsin?
Yes.
Yes,
I
they
think
are.
they are.
You're right.
But not,
University of
but not
Wisconsin.
continuing ed. The college that he's inside of may not be
You're right.
unionized. I could be wrong. I don't want to push that too hard, but it really was a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm unionized, but my instructional faculty are not. It makes things harder when that's the cultural piece. When you've got a bargaining unit that's representing the traditional delivery system, whatever that is at your institution, and you're saying, I want to do this other thing that doesn't necessarily dovetail real well with this set of work. There may be some work for your people in this new model, but as Paul said, not the same work and not as much work. I mean, and he's been saying this for several years because he played it different with distance learning, but he's been straighter with competency. We have to tell our faculties the truth, that this approach is going to be faculty light, and the faculty work will be different, and we shouldn't pretend that it won't be. I mean, I was one of those guys selling distance learning 20 years ago. Got that question from everybody, is this going to replace us? And I said, no, it's not. And then when they weren't listening, I said, but it's going to change the way you do your work. Mm-hmm. But as long as I wasn't actively replacing people, they weren't as concerned about working a little differently. This is different. So in a unionized environment, your business model is going to have to speak to that. It won't be simple.
And what Wisconsin had to do, obviously, is start working with their faculty from day one and engage them, involve them, and they did. And they're very proud of the fact that they use full-time faculty in their program. And Texas also is very proud of that as well. And what I've heard from them is that because they involve the faculty so much and so often in the design and development of their program, is that the faculty would, they had to take it on as sort of an add-on to their existing roles. But they would teach, a module or be engaged in coaching someone through a part of the competency-based program, and then they would take that approach back to their more traditional face-to-face courses. And so they would report back to the group, we're incorporating some of these approaches in our regular classrooms. It's helping me sort of reinvent how I teach in the rest of my job. So I think that engaging with traditional faculty and full-time faculty has some benefits too, because you're going to see elements of this new program bleed into other parts of the organization.
But you will also see an impact on the cost model. So when Paul was designing his program, he had this great story about, I don't know if you've ever seen this, that my tax form does this. So as I'm filling out my taxes, it keeps changing what my refund might be. Well, he had a number on a blackboard, and anytime they added or subtracted something to the program, he changed the number, and he had a target. And so if you're trying to keep costs low, full-time faculty in negotiations with bargaining units, as it was the case in Wisconsin, well, you'll end up with a higher priced product. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's part of including this other workforce in your negotiation. And if you don't have to do that, you might be able to drive costs lower. Certainly, Southern New Hampshire did a remarkable job of driving the cost of their associate's degree to, what, at $2,500? Is that the number? That's amazing. Good question. Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Right. Yep. Is separated from everything else.
Right.
Yeah. Using
Northern
the-
Arizona's program is in a separate area. Yeah.
Is separated. I mean, I'm going to tell you the truth. I've been in higher ed my entire career, and the arguments you can't win are the cultural ones. They just suck the life out of those of you, and this is my job, that have to push a new business model. And so when I look at Charter Oak, I know what its strengths are, and I know what its weaknesses are. I know what it isn't going to do real well. And I try my damnedest to steer the institution, as you were saying, into the things I know it can do and away from the things it can't. And a lot of times when people look at your institution and go, well, this thing over here should be a no-brainer. Well, you don't see Charter Oak building a Southern New Hampshire-like competency-based program, because I got to tell you, we couldn't do it. Our culture wouldn't do that. It would struggle. I'd get old and get poor and die. It's all bad. So I'm telling you, there's 3 pieces you got to work on. The one that's fun is the pedagogical one. It's the thing higher ed does best. Pure discussions of pedagogy. It's the best way to educate this group of students in this content area using these delivery methodologies or these assessments. That's a fun conversation. The cultural one and the business model one, the business model one's hard because we're the most ignorant business I've ever seen about how we make our money. We're not even comfortable talking about our money. We won't talk about the people who pay us as customers. We've got a lot of blind spots on our own business models. But it's the cultural conversation that'll kill you. I mean, and it doesn't have to just be with a bargaining unit. It can be with anybody who thinks the mission of your institution is this here, and whatever you're doing isn't in that umbrella. And that can happen anywhere, even at a non-traditional place.
In developing and implementing these at your institutions or in your organization, have there been any challenges that
Faculty in a non-traditional college, a college whose mission is strictly adults, accelerated 5 8-week programming, huge PLA, predominantly run by adjuncts, full-time faculty, even though they're in a unit that's their mission. When I went to Regis University, I was really very surprised at how traditional my non-traditional faculty were. And in going through these models, I was having the same conversation. And so I think the advantage Paul had is that he started almost from scratch. Same with Northern Arizona. They brought in a whole lot of new people, Western governors. They brought in new people to do these new models. So when you try a new model that has faculty that have been embedded in an organization for 15, 20 years, you're dealing with the same cultural issue that Ed is referring to, and I have to say I was not prepared for that, actually.
Another thing that institutions have told me that was unexpected was, they go through the whole design process and everyone's really excited about what they're building, and then somebody thinks, oh, we really should talk to the registrar about this, right?
Yeah, right.
Or
Has anyone seen the business office?
or has anybody actually looked at our institution's academic policies to see where this is going to really trip up a certain student, for example, on satisfactory academic progress? Not the financial aid rules, but the own institution's rules about what constitutes satisfactory academic progress and how you're going to define that with this new program. So, one recommendation is to really, the registrar's got to be at the table from day one. And secondly is have somebody going through your institution's academic policies and just asking the question, is this going to be affected by the new way we're doing this competency-based approach? And go through line by line to see where there could be some possible trip-ups, because you might need to revisit what those policies are and have, to figure out, do we need a new policy for this program?
Financial aid. I've been working on this now for 3 years with CBEN. Now, I don't know anything about financial aid. I'm a college president. It's the lifeblood of my institution, and I'm as ignorant about that as I am its federal tax policy. But I've tried to learn. Trust me, it isn't easy. And there's a reason why you can't do anything. It's a you can't get there from here kind of place. And the reasons for all of the regulations are the bad actors that have existed next to our industry for 50 years. And they've come in various flavors. And so CBEN worked really hard to get the experimental sites launched, and we did it in a year, which was amazing. We had meetings with everybody, accreditors, the Department of Ed, anybody that would come to Chicago in a windowless room and talk to us. But it's still not out of the box. The experimental site submissions are in, but we haven't heard yet what the next step is. The OIG report that Paul referenced cast a negative light on. It's just a roller coaster ride on whether we'll get enough breathing room inside the financial aid rules to operate. I mean, I spend a lot of time with creative people in higher ed trying to be one. And when I talk to those creative people, the magic formula for doing something new in higher ed is to be neither accredited nor financial aid eligible. Those are the two barriers. The accreditor saying, well, you need to write a substantive change argument, and we'll look at it next month or 3 months from now because it's summer. And the financial aid people saying, well, we don't even know what you're talking about. Come back when you're credit hour based. There are folks inside the .com community on the West Coast and in various places around the country trying to produce learning environments. I won't say that they're necessarily colleges, they could be, in which the outcomes of that learning environment will be so powerful that employers will hire their graduates even though they aren't accredited, and people will pay for the program and not use Pell money. And there are places that are succeeding this way. And the fear I have, because that's what I do, is worry for a living, is they're going to come after our most successful financial propositions, MBA programs, computer technology programs. We just launched the cybersecurity program. These are the sorts of things that give you employability. You can do computer graphics and animation at a high level, if you can write code at a high level, and if you can get that learning in 18 months for $60,000 and have a guaranteed six-figure job when you walk out the door, who cares about accreditation and financial aid? Would you borrow 60 grand to make 100 grand? Because we've got students borrowing 60 grand to work at McDonald's. So while there isn't a lot of that out there yet, it does exist. And if that's where the creativity goes, not accredited, not eligible for financial aid, we're going to be, as an industry, left with some really weak propositions. So we have to figure this out. We have to lower the cost, we have to increase graduation rates and access, or others will.
There's a company in Denver, Colorado that is doing a 6-month training for Red River Software, which I believe is based up in Claremont, New Hampshire. And the course is $30,000 and they guarantee you a job that pays you $60,000 at the end of that training. And at the end of that training, if you don't have a job within 6 months, they refund your money.
They're not accredited.
They're not
They're
accredited.
not eligible for financial aid, and they don't care. So when I tell that story to the Washington people, they leave the room. In other words, the whole discussion is about regulations, whether it's at the accreditation level or at the financial aid level. But the real conversation, I think the reason you came today, it's about creativity. How can we do what we do better, faster, cheaper, clearer, with better outcomes? That's a great conversation. I got to warn you, you asked the question, what are the surprising barriers? The regulations are really, really difficult. And you can ask the people that have